Good afternoon, good morning to some, depending on where you're at in the world. We're going to do a kind of fun topic that is definitely security related, but I think it's a problem every single deployment that I've ever looked at has. And everyone has 99 problems, and privilege groups are definitely one. So we're going to kind of go over what Active Directory is basically fighting you to the death on, and how we can be better so that we can have higher scores on penetration tests and vulnerability assessments and everything like that. So we're going to kind of go through this thing here. I'm a nerd hacker. I do talks at red team things on how to break into people's deployments, whether it's virtual desktops or Active Directory, and then blue team stuff with y'all on how to defend your honor. And I'm a CTP and V expert and run the Nashville Citrix user group, and just run around and yap with people and click and type on things, And so normally I would be pointing at something right now in Greece, but here we are, I'm pointing at a computer. All right, so let's do this. One of the things is most people don't realize the fundamentals of how many permissions you actually get as a domain user, and then every built-in privilege group from there. So they are very wild. Every deployment's like this. It's not a big deal. So when we talk about it, let's talk about it in two kind of ways here, and the total of three. So we've got privileged access. This is when a user can access something and can be elevated to allow them to access things that weren't intended based on their original privileges. In some cases, there are unintended gremlins from years past that are still associated with certain access and groups and everything in between that. Privileged accounts. Now, we hope that everyone here, we'll get into this, has a separate privileged account that has that domain admin, server admin, virtualization admin, VDI admin assigned to it. But this is where we want to make sure we have some kind of standard to go through this. Privilege groups, these are the groups that have the powers. There's built-in groups, which we're going to talk about
Sorry.
very quickly. There.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
now it's good. Now all right, cool. So there's our three things that I was yapping about that now you can see. So you got the privileged access, the accounts, and then the groups. Some of these groups are a little more exciting than others, but our goals with any privileged account management solution is we need to know who or what has access to what. And this means people and things, service accounts. And when was it used last? Who was the last time it logged in? When was the last time and where was it accessed from? Who logged in from what where? And then what did they do on there? This is the thing most people have a huge blind spot of, especially incident response, is they know something that someone did something, but they don't know what they did and when they did it. And so check thy privilege. Let's see how bad it is. Are you a domain admin? If we were in a real thing and I told you to raise your hand, usually I see about half the room raise their hand. And it's because this is the easy button to give you permissions. And do you know everyone and everything that's in your domain admin group? Most likely not. There's usually a lot of things that have been in there since your domain was birthed 5, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. There is random service accounts and or random people that have been added that were supposed to be removed but never were. And then, just like I said, years ago, things come after that. And if you had on-site Exchange, it means that your Active Directory has a little bit of extra flair that is going to come into play there. And so who is in your enterprise and schema admin groups? Because those are the people that needed to be in those groups to perform very specific things, but they didn't need to stay in those groups forever. And that's usually what happens. And hopefully you've got some kind of Citrix or VDI admin group. And it hopefully is just a local admin on the servers that are required, right? So from storefront, or if we're talking about connection servers and things like that, and even UAGs if you're bound to Active Directory. And then within the Citrix consoles, it has the appropriate permissions that you're hunting for there. And then if you've got a Citrix ADC or an F5, hopefully you've got an admin group there, because you should never be logging into either one of those ADC appliances as that root service account. And that's pretty much good advice for all systems. You should always bind everything to an external authentication source that you can audit and control the password policies, and you know when someone logs in instead of going to each one of these disparate systems and trying to figure it out. And you should have alerts set up on these systems to know when someone does log in as NSRoot. So then the next one, just like I talked about a little earlier, is I hope you have a separate admin account. If you don't, you need to immediately. This is the first thing anyone should do. This doesn't cost any money to fix. And because you should never be checking the internets or the emails with your admin account ever. And you should definitely never seal your account, your image, with your domain admin-ish account, because that will allow me to do what's called a Kerberos or golden ticket attack, whichever way, using Kerberos against you. And this is just because this is how that LSAS service is built up in Windows, so that when you log into a computer with your domain credentials, you could unplug it from the network and still log in with your domain credentials. And that's because half that token is stored on that computer. So there's lots of fun things you can do that. And hopefully you have a different password for your admin account. And I hope you also have different passwords requirements for those accounts. I recommend, we'll get into it a little bit later, but you definitely want to have more. And then how much power does your service desk has? I think the smaller the organization, the more power most service desks have, where they may actually be maybe just account operators, but many I find are in domain admins. And it's just like I said before, it's the easy button for privilege. And then, did you do any custom delegations? The more custom delegations you do, the harder sometimes it is to audit. So, but you need to go hunt and you need to look at the ACLs in your domain. There's a couple easy ways to do it. So here's kind of the Six Sigma that you need to worry about. These are the first ones that we need to hit. So we've got administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, and then schema admins, because it has some very specific permissions, and then the others, account operators and backup operators, and then the others, which we'll get into. So within Active Directory, there are 2 OUs where all these groups are contained. By default, you could move these, but I don't recommend it. If anything, there should be no other groups or objects or entities within these 2 OUs. This will make your auditing easier. It'll also make your delegation easier, because you'll be able to know exactly where all machine accounts are. So the built-in OU looks like this. And this is if you just next a domain. This is a 2016 domain, so this is the groups you get, and you can still see there's pre-Windows 2000, there's all a pile of stuff. So now this is where we're gonna go ramming speed through the DeLorean here. But as you can see, we're gonna only stop at these. But every group either has direct user rights that have been assigned to it with Active Directory policies, the default domain policy or domain controllers policy, or a direct entry into the ACL in Active Directory. And then you have inherited user rights that are given to it by virtue of where it was put. So almost everything has those 4 permissions. Access this computer from the network, which means I can literally access it, PowerShell remoting, WMI remoting if it's enabled, not RDP, right? Because RDP requires you to be in another group, but every user and group can add workstations to the domain. This was cool when we were all in the 90s and it was all in a thick net cable, but not cool anymore. So you need to make sure you're restricting who can add workstations to the domain, because most people never look at OUs and never have monitoring turned on to know if there is a new machine object ever added. Bypass traverse checking is just basically a way that it can, as you traverse file systems, it can get past it. If it doesn't have permissions to a top folder, it can get down to the bottom folder where it does. And then increase a process working set, which is basically allocate resources for a process to run. So account operators, this one kind of got messed up here. But basically this one is the one that allows you to manage the groups that are listed below. So if you're an account operator, you really do have a lot of power built in from Active Directory, so that you can manage the members of these groups, and you can reset usernames and passwords and stuff like that too. But what this also means is that they could put people in groups that give them extra access. And the key ones to remember here is the administrators group, the server operators group, and the backup operators group. because inherently those three groups have access to almost every entity in the domain, which may not be what you intended when you gave them account operator permissions. So then we kind of click through here. Account operators, in most deployments, you want it to be very specific by job role. Most times you don't want someone to just immediately become an account operator. They need to work it. And you also I always recommend to just make a default, a different group for that. And then depending on their OU structure is going to be how easy or hard it's going to be to apply that, so that you can make sure that your account operators and people that need to reset passwords can do it, but they can't reset passwords for, say, domain admins. They can't get and reset passwords to the CEO's email or CFOs. So you need to have different tiers of users. Backup operators seems pretty benign, but having access to this is almost like a domain admin when it comes to privileges across the workstations. It has a lot more by default, and it should be empty. And then we're going to kind of blast through these: certificate DCOM, cryptographic operators, distributed COM, event log readers, pretty much no permissions other than allowed to do that. Guest, hopefully there's none in your domain. I just did an audit last week and there was a lot of people in there. And there's definitely some shady things that can happen when people are inside that. Hyper-V admins, if you're still rocking that, like XenServer, right? IIS users, this is a default built-in one because IIS has extensions in the Active Directory to do all kinds of fun things. Incoming forest trust. So if you are in a forest or were in a forest, you want to look at these groups for sure. Network configuration operator, performance log users, like a lot of these, you're going to have this deck, so don't think that you'll be able to do it. Now, if your deployment was even built today, you're still going to have this pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group. If your deployment was built before that, you're actually going to have stuff in there. You're going to see some of your Exchange servers in there, possibly some SQL servers, and probably random computers that people were fixing and doing things as you were upgrading from 2000 to 2003 and then on from there. Print operators, this can actually be a very powerful group. This group can allow you to access any print server. That doesn't sound bad, but most people in the, I'd say even late 90s, early 2000s still put print servers on domain controllers, and domain controllers are print servers in many cases. So if it's a print server, then now they have access to do a little bit more on that server than they would have had as just a domain user. RAS and IIS, if you're still doing that, RDS endpoint, RDS management, RDS remote access, remote desktop users, obviously a big one. And controlling this is who's going to be able to have that interactive session to your computer. And usually this will be your Citrix entitlement group too, or related to it. Remote management users kind of go in there. Read-only domain controllers, don't see it too much. A lot of people wanted to do this, but never really got into it the whole way. Replicator group, another thing, if you're using DFS and depending on your non-sysvol FRS replication, you'll see this set to whatever application or service account that it was set to. Server operators, another pretty powerful group because they have access to log into every server operating system and do those things. So this is also one that a lot of people have sneaky access to that I would recommend taking a look at. Storage replica, if you've got some of that. Terminal server, license server, everyone has that if you've got a RDS based deployment. Users, everyone will have users, right? And so this will give you some of those Active Directory basic functions. And this is meant to prevent some intentional system-wide things that can go on. Windows authorized access, WinRM, right? So that you can do WinRM to computers. All right, so that was the built-in OU, and now this is the user's OU. And don't worry, you will get this presentation. You didn't need to study. And so this is another default install of Active Directory, and this is what you're always going to get here, right? So now we're in the user's OU. Administrator, right? This is the one that I think most people have the biggest apprehension on changing the password or remediating issues, but it's also the most passive in most cases. Most people didn't use it to run lots of service accounts, so it should be fine. But that password should at least be changed yearly. And logging, just like any other default root account for something, should be cranked up to 11. And it doesn't have any direct user rights. It has all the inherited user rights. So within user rights assignments and local rights, this is where it gets all its power at the root level of Active Directory, where it can pretty much do all the things that you need to do. So this account, we has the power if we are that. It's a big, big, big one. And so the default membership should look like this. This should be the only people in that, the members that the administrator account should be in. And in these exact same groups, in a perfect world with good delegated access, this should be the only user in all those. This should be in the break the glass account that you can use later, right? That if you need to, even if you go down that road. So administrators group should not have it, and it doesn't have any privilege on member servers or workstations, but has permissions within the domain. Should be empty, just like we said before. And so in the administrators group, it's a mucho power O2, right? So it's got basically the same power level as an administrator, but it also has it for the domain. So lots and lots of stuff going on there. RDoc, nothing too fancy there. Cert publishers there, clonable domain controllers, denied RDoc, DHCP users, DHCP administrators. These can also be very powerful and control a lot of stuff there too. DNS admins let you actually control DNS servers if they're segmented off the domain controller role. DNS update proxy goes into there. And then, of course, the one that we all love and hate is the domain admin groups. This has been where everybody has always put stuff, but this should also be a break the glass scenario. You should not need to be in domain admins all the time with a group. You should have your administrator account, one other break the glass account, and that should be all you need. And so domain admins is the group that has rights and permissions and granted to the local administrators group on all the computers. So no direct rights, but the same 29 rights that administrators have, but on every computer. So big deal. Domain computers, kind of the same thing. It's pretty interesting. If you're in the domain computers group, you can add a computer to the domain. It's a little bit of domain inception. Domain controllers, same thing. Domain guest, you can add a workstation as a guest. That's very helpful. Just like I said before, look in your guest group because you might be surprised what's in there. Domain users, we expect this should be users primary group, but just like I said before, why do they need to add workstations to the domain? This was when we were in the office and it was all good. Enterprise admin only exists at that root. This should be the same thing. It should be completely empty minus your administrator account and your one other break the glass account. No one else should be hanging out in this account. You should delegate those permissions. It has the same 29 permissions as domain admins. It's just applied at a different level. And it pretty much has unlimited power because it also gives them rights to do things within Active Directory users and groups. Enterprise key admins from there, read-only domain controllers, group policy creator owners. This should be empty by default, but what happens is people think they need to add people directly to this. Whereas if they have rights to write to Active Directory and add policies and edit policies, they will automatically become a group policy creator and the owner of the policy, and they don't actually have to be added to this group. Event log readers is exactly what it is. There's the guest user, right? This user can also change, add users to the domain based on it being in the guest group. Hyper-V is in here again too, and the KRB TGT. This is one of those service accounts that runs Bartertown for your whole Kerberos domain in Active Directory. And you should change that password every 40 days. There's some scripts to do that. Key admins, protected users. A lot of people don't use this. All your delegated groups that you create that are Citrix admin, SQL admin, file server admin, finance admin, workstation admin should be inside this protected users group. And that's because if you look at this link here from Microsoft, there's a little bit extra locking, logging, and protection that's built into things that are added there. So definitely check this out. If you've never used it, it's very easy to get into it. It's not some huge complicated thing that's going to take you 2 months to roll out. RAS and AS, again, read-only domain controller. Who's even using them? If you look at this AD security from Sean Metcalf, his post on this, there's a lot of security vulnerabilities that can be had by a read-only domain controller that don't exist even in a regular domain controller. So in many cases, it may be better just to make a regular domain controller with good security controls than do this right here with a read-only. Schema admins, same thing. They don't have any other administrative rights other than the schema, but having access to the schema means that you can do some interesting things, and you can edit the schema so that you could technically have more rights or add yourself to other things. So doesn't look that powerful, but having access to the schema is there. So I know that was a whole lot. Now what? Now we need to actually start fixing the things, right? And if you could come in on Saturday to fix our privilege problem, that would be great, right? And luckily, it actually is Saturday, so you guys are ready to go. Now, danger, AD administrator, be careful with these things, right? Some of the things that we're going to talk about on how to fix it can be very bad for your health or your weekend if you get a little too antsy in your pantsy and you drink too much syrup. So first step, no matter what, when we're doing any privileged account deployment and remediation anywhere, is we must have separate privileged accounts. And that means anyone that has administrator access to domain objects. Now, you might still have people in finance that need to have access and be admins on their local computer. I'm not getting in that battle today. I don't want to weigh in there. But if you don't use separate privileged accounts, it's a very sad panda. And I'm sorry, you got to do this. So the first thing we need to do, once we have our separate privileged accounts, we need to go after the Fantastic Four. We need to go after the administrator. We need to go after administrators. We need to go after domain admins and enterprise admins, right? These are the accounts that all have these 29 powers in your domain, which can be very dangerous, right? So each one of these, we have that permission and we need to control it. So let me click this here. So hopefully, to figure out what we're going to do, you should hopefully have an IT org chart, and you should know who's in charge of what. And that should be the system. This is connected to there, that's connected to this. Now, I also highly recommend searching your domain, your email domain that you use in dhash.com, and to see if any of your domain admins, especially in your admins, have used their email or corporate email to register for Adobe or LinkedIn, and then have a breached password sitting there out in the internet, because we might want to talk to them, right? And if you have access to those passwords, it can be helpful. It's a good training opportunity. Every time I do this and I run a public data search on a company and I show them their usernames and passwords and IP addresses when they signed up for LinkedIn and all the data depending on the breach, it's really eye-opening, and it makes people really take cybersecurity a little more seriously, because it really shows how they are using the same password for multiple accounts and all kinds of other good things. And if any of your privileged users in there, double extra red flag, then you need to pull your account members for your Sizzling Six. So you can just do a get member for account operators and all those. And we want to look, do all these people actually need to be in this group? Go back to that org chart. Remember that some of these groups should be blank. So we'll have to plan for that. And we need to make sure we also find all the service accounts and put those in a bucket. We don't want to deal with the service accounts right off the bat. We want to deal with people first. We can change the people's habits. It's really hard to change the service accounts habits, because that means we're going to have to maybe make a new service account, make new groups, edit this, edit that, and kind of dive into that. So how bad is it for where you're at? Oop, went too far. Oop. So once we've done that, we want to pull all AD users for password age and never expires. Go after that never expire list first. Look for your privileged account list first within there. How bad is it? Most people's privileged accounts are set to password never expires, and it's just because we are domain admin, we run Thunderdome, and we are Master Blaster. We do not worry about the things that most people worry about. So we want to go after those privileged accounts, and then every user that's beyond that. And you want to find out what that key is. So there's going to be people that have set to password never expires, and that could have been from a help desk call 3 years ago, and they've never changed their password since. And it's because they were on the phone with a service desk person for an hour and a half, resetting their password, then setting it again, then resetting it and then resetting it again, and never getting it. And so then they just set the password never expires, made it password 123 party, and that's what it's been since. So you're really going to find some interesting stuff. And if you've done any customized default AD permissions and delegations, then it's going to be a little more complicated for you to do it, because it means the default recommendations that I'll have and everyone else will have won't really apply to you, because you've already moved certain things into certain OUs and maybe have already delegated things. But you still want to go from there. Now, vendors and third parties, there have been a lot of breaches related to vendor or third party access. They got attacked, and then the company that they were connected to and worked with got attacked. So you need to look at how many vendors and third party people are in your system right now. Should they still be? Are you still in an open service contract with these people? And then from there, if you have also some trust enabled, is it one way or two way? And there's a lot of service providers that do this in that level, that's how they integrate in there. And do any of them have elevated or privileged access in your deployment? Many cases when we have IT nerds come in and help us from any company, we may give them access to the keys to the kingdom, and we don't pay attention anymore past that. This is why a naming standard for your vendors and third parties is very key. So that way you can make sure it's a special tier of access, and it will help you with logging and alerting, so that you can make sure you have login hours and expiration of those, all kinds of other good stuff. Service accounts, just like we said before, we want to find all the service accounts next. Once we've kind of cleared through some of our password policies, we've went through our privileged user group, our regular user group, our password stuff, then we want to find all our service accounts, make sure they're using a naming standard too. We don't want Albus Dumbledore and Obi-Wan Kenobi to be the name of that service account. We would like it to be SVC SQL always on, so that way it's gone there. So we want to make sure and add that to this. This will help them get protected against pass the hash attack. Check your privileges. There's a couple PowerShell scripts that you can run to find where service accounts are bound to Windows services in your domain. And you want to change those passwords. You want to put it on your calendar. This is the easiest way to help fix this, so that if you're one of the companies that's getting a regular security audit, change these passwords once a year, 1 month or so before that audit is normally scheduled. And in that way, your password age is never more than 365 days. And when you do your audit, you'll always get a pass score on it. So sometimes this is easy to do. Sometimes it only takes 30 minutes to an hour to do it, depending on how many service accounts and how quick you can do it. Admin groups, desktop admins. Do they need access? Do they need them to be local admins on the desktops? Probably yes. Use restricted groups or desired state configurations to do that. And then what else do those people need? Server admins. This usually means that they're more. I've seen this also be called like an infrastructure admin, where they may still be a local admin on all the database file servers, web servers, Citrix servers, VDI, AppX, whatever. But you also may want to make subgroups for those. And who else do they, and what else do they need? Add that delegation to that specific group. All right, so we've just made 2 groups, server admin and desktop admin, and we've added the special things that we need for them, and we just kind of keep going. OU structure. I always recommend never using any of the default OUs for anything. And I like to keep it simple. So I got accounts, desktops, and servers. Every desktop goes in one OU, every server goes in there, and it's all broken down by building, data center, production, QA, tiers. And then within your departments and your groups are within accounts too. So this all comes back to being able to, if you have tons and tons of OUs, I've went to places that have 50 to 100 root OUs, this is going to be very complicated, because you're going to have to apply those policies and these delegations 50 to 100 times. If you put all your OUs under an OU and you nest your structure like that, you put all the permissions on one root OU and you only make deviations underneath that. So very, very cool stuff. And then passwords. How many passwords do you require? 7 to 16 for users is what I normally see. 20 plus for privileged accounts and service accounts is highly recommended. And I hope all service accounts have unique passwords. I've went to a lot of places, and that when we do audits and we crack the passwords on the domain just so that we can audit it and see it, it's very surprising that sometimes when an admin comes in, they use the same password for every service account they made, especially when there's no password manager involved. And so what's your password age? Complexity, I don't really get it wrapped around. I still think expiration is good. Account lockout settings, I definitely think are good. Password history is also good, so it slows down the rotation of passwords. And if you haven't heard of Jason Samuel, you should definitely check out lots and lots of his blogs on passwordless, FIDO2, and other multi-factor solutions. He is a treasure trove of information when it comes to what you can get done with what you own, and most likely very free solutions for at least your privileged accounts, but also maybe for your users. So when I do big corporate trainings for people, we talk about password versus passphrase. Hopefully most of you kind of get this, but this is kind of a password that I would see, like spring 2020, and then spring 2020 with the uppercase, and then I do spring 2020 was warm. That takes a little bit longer to crack, but spring 2020 was warm with spaces goes from basically hours to weeks to months, and then put a couple flair at the end, a couple special characters, especially with spaces between them. It can take year, and this conference is the bestest. I learned all the things, almost a light year to break that kind of password. And so if you've got your favorite song lyrics, you've got your favorite quotes from movies that make you LOL, that should be the password or passphrase that you should use. And you should use spaces. Type it like a proper sentence. It makes it a much, much stronger password. And what we see by that is when we look at how long it takes to crack passwords, this is all done by days. That a 13-character password, depending on if it's just uppercase, lowercase numbers, can just take a couple days to a couple weeks to a couple months to years to break. And then if you get to that 16 to 18-character password and you have uppercase, lowercase numbers, it becomes a very, very powerful password, and I highly recommend looking at it. Your privileged accounts should be in the 20 plus, because look at the 20 plus, even lowercase letters only, 288,312,000 to break that password, all right, with just lowercase only. So long passwords are so much stronger than complex ones, which also, if you get people to understand passphrases, you'll also lower your password reset callouts, because people are not going to have this uppercase ampersand LL6234, some deciphering cryptic that they're doing. So highly recommend going to passphrases and talk about it. Weak passwords is going to burn your house down. It is the number one reason that all the bad things start happening. And so do you have it? If you've got Windows, you got to check you most likely have a privilege problem. If you also have Windows, you also have Windows Event Log Forwarding. That is free. And if you have a SIM, you want to integrate this for alerts. You want to understand what's going on with passwords, what's going on with group memberships. If you have a password manager, if you don't have one, I highly recommend Bitwarden. There's a couple other free to paid cheap ones. And if you have room for a couple RDS VMs, you can make your own privileged account management workstation system. So some people will call it a PAM system. Some people will call it a PAW, Privileged Access Workstation. So you could do a DIY solution or a paid solution. What we need to do is we need to make sure your groups are cleaned up before you start a PAM solution. Anyway, paid or free that you're going to do, you need to know who's in which groups, what access does it have, what does that give them to do? Because you got to be able to separate people by those groups, because you also need to control what passwords they have access to, what servers they have access to. And you're going to need a plan for logging. If we can't do WEF or a SIM at all, we need to at least make sure we're doing it on the domain controller. If you can only afford to do WEF because it's free and you only have enough disk space for that, turn on WEF for all your domain controllers, then your file servers, and you can work your way up. And then that way you can save up your lunch money to get more money next year to have a better logging solution. You can either allow privileged users to have specific delivery groups or entitlement groups when we talk about that. That way it has to restart on log off for PBS to do that. And then when admin users log in, it will keep it up. And you can also make sure that your privileged account solution type of thing, whichever way you go, make sure it requires MFA. Make sure there's more than just a username and password that gives you access to all the keys of your kingdom, especially after we did that. So this is kind of make your groups, right? Service desk level 1, level 2, level 3. And so basically each level has the previous level before, but we're adding more people. So this means as someone that comes to your deployment and is a service desk, they don't automatically get access to everything. They have to work for it, right? And they have to show that they know what to do. And whether this is Citrix or VMware or WVD or AWS, you want to give them the appropriate permissions within that VDI solution to do their thing. Every server admin, like we talked about before, delegate it, break it up as much as you can. There may be some people that do need to rule all servers. That's fine. But there's probably a lot of other people that only need to be in charge of just the Citrix servers, the VMware servers, and things like that. So what this looks like is you got your privileged users group, and that could be inside your protected users group. You got your service desk, your AD, your SQL. This is where they get this basic access. Your RDS is here. We're going to have all these logs enabled, PowerShell logging, WEF is enabled. All the things are going on here. And in that way, when people are logging on to that RDS box, we know what they're doing because they're doing it from there. Now, phase one is still allow people to log into things from other sources. Phase two means you don't allow people to log into from other sources. You do want to leave one physical VLAN so that you could break the glass situation. You could get into any system from that VLAN. PAM solutions kind of all in there. What's really good about these, especially these paid ones down there, these are kind of the big ones I see a lot, is you don't even know what the password is. You never knew it, and after you used a privileged account, it automatically checks it out, checks it back in, and changes the password. There can also be approval workflows. So if you want to be domain admin or enterprise admin because you're about to do something that requires that permission, you have to get an approval set up for it. And you can also do session management to see what's actually being recorded and done on those systems when they're managing things. So thoughts, we want to make this more better. This isn't a quick fix for everything. You need leadership buy-in. This should be a policy or standard and not just an arts and crafts project that you want to start on your own. It's good that you want to be the initiative to help get this stuff tamed, but you also need to make sure that you know that the leadership wants to do this, because it will be annoying. You're going to have pushback. Why do I have to RDP to this thing to do that? Why do I have to use a separate admin account now? You need to have those kind of training sessions and go from that. And it's not going to be 100% more secure on day one. You have to grow into a privileged account management solution and fixing your current privileged accounts within Active Directory. Roadblocks, it's always easier to do it the same way you've been doing it, but it's less secure. Service accounts and new things need to be getting auto added and auto discovered. Auditing is key. You don't want ways around the solution to show up. You want to know when service accounts are getting created and what's going on with them. And lost priorities. You have to want to do this. You need leadership to make it happen. If it's just as arts and crafts, it's never going to get the time assigned to it to really get the stuff done. And then use like groups and naming standards. Make stuff that makes sense so that you can look at the group and go down this. Level 2 is definitely making sure that you can use obfuscation, but level 1, you just need to do this. And so when we talk about a group setup like this shows how a user is NCTX users, they're in NextGen, they're a clinical user, but Susan can access it externally, but Joe can use a USB device. Both of them can print. Both of them have access to the file shares, the delivery group, the app locker, everything else is in there. So overall, audit your deployment. Who has access to what and who needs what? Clean up your findings. It's going to take a while, especially your password stuff. Look at those password policies, adjust, make it tougher. Go for passphrases. Don't go for crazy complex passwords. Look at your multi-factor authentication requirements and go from there. And get your logging done and your domain controllers first, then your file servers, database, web, and other critical systems. WEF is free. It just takes time and disk space to get it implemented. And then create a PAM solution, whichever way, whether you're going to do a DIY solution or you're going to pay for it. And so here's the next checklist. You can kind of read through here. We kind of went over this. This is just kind of a good screenshot one here that kind of tells that and goes through the things that we talked about a little more in detail. And put time on your calendar each week to do this. Crawl, walk, and then run, right? Don't try to get this all done on the weekend. And we don't want to keep going down the road that we've been going on, using these default AD groups that have way more permissions than they need to. You want to make custom AD groups to allow those controls. Worst findings, 500-person company, 150 people in domain admins. hundreds of accounts more than passwords older than 3 years. A couple passwords were over 15 years old, and every admin was in every privileged default group, from enterprise admins to schema admins to backup operators, server operators to domain admins, the whole kit and caboodle. So don't be that company. You can do better. I know that was a lot, and I'm sorry for being late here. I'm out here cooking some turkey in trash cans. I'll have to tweet it so you guys can see it on a Cub Scout trip.